Most Christians are praying for financial blessing right now, and they are completely skipping the daily habits God actually requires before He releases it. I have spent over 2 decades studying the practical theology of biblical wisdom literature, not from a pulpit, not from a seminary classroom, from the text itself in its historical and original language context, pattern by pattern, principle by principle. And what I found buried across both testaments is not inspirational. It is operational, and of Sikhs' specific daily habits, practices Scripture connects directly to the release of God's financial blessing. Not vague spiritual encouragement, not a theological discussion you absorb and forget. 6 concrete daily practices with direct scriptural grounding. Most pastors will not say this from a stage, but the text says it plainly. And before this teaching is finished, you will have all 6. More importantly, you will understand why most believers who pray earnestly and give faithfully are still financially stagnant. And the answer is going to be more uncomfortable than most of what you have been told in church. Here is what you need to hold before we go any further. The Bible addresses money in over 2,300 verses. That is more than it devotes to prayer, more than faith, more than love. Nearly half of the parables Jesus told involve wealth, resources, and the management of material provision. A full third deal directly with money itself. This is not a peripheral topic that serious believers graduate past. It is a central discipleship issue, and if God devoted that volume of textual attention to how money works in a covenant relationship, the only reasonable conclusion is that He has already given you a detailed financial framework. The question is not whether the system exists. The question is whether you are operating inside it. The two authorities. Every person manages money under one of two authorities. The first is the logic of personal instinct, cultural conditioning, and financial impulse. The second is God's revealed system as preserved in the text. You can blend elements of both if you want, but you cannot blend them and expect the outcomes the covenant promises. The security you believe you are building on the wrong foundation is not security, it is delay. Most believers are not financially struggling because they lack income. They are financially struggling because they are applying fragments of God's system, while the majority of their financial behavior runs on a different operating authority entirely. They give on Sundays, they pray when debt accumulates, and the other 168 hours of the week, every financial decision is made from instinct, cultural default, and whatever the account balance says. That is not a character failure. That is a systems problem, and systems problems require system solutions. In a moment, we will reach habit 3. And habit 3 is the one that most church-attending tithing believers are still getting completely wrong. Not the unreached, not the unbeliever, the committed, church-going, giving believer. Hold that. But before the 6 habits, there is a foundational premise that changes how you see every dollar that has ever passed through your hands. You do not own any of it. Deuteronomy 8:17 through 18 says this: You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant. Read that carefully. The ability to produce wealth is a gift, not the wealth itself. The capacity, which means the wealth that capacity generates, is not yours by origin. You are a manager. God is the owner. Every dollar that flows through your hands is a temporary loan under divine audit, not motivational language, not a spiritual metaphor designed to inspire generosity. A theological load-bearing wall. Here is why this premise matters before anything else. If you believe you are an owner, the 6 habits become self-improvement strategies. Useful, but not transformative. If you believe you are a manager accountable to an owner, the 6 habits become acts of stewardship, obedience. And those two postures produce completely different outcomes over time. The daily report card God is reviewing is not your income. It is how you manage what already belongs to Him. That reframe changes everything downstream. The 6 habits. Habit 1. Give first before you budget. The first fruits principle appears in Scripture not as a generosity program, but as a financial posture declaration. Who is your financial authority? The answer is demonstrated not by what you say, but by what moves first. Proverbs 3 to 9 through 10 says this: Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Not after expenses, not after savings. First, that word is not incidental. It is the entire instruction. The person who gives 10% first is operating from a framework of abundance and covenant trust. The person who intends to give from what remains is operating from a framework of shortage. Those two frameworks produce completely different financial behaviors, completely different decisions, completely different outcomes year over year. I know believers who gave when they had surplus and cut the tithe when things tightened. Their income had a ceiling it never broke through in all that time. When they committed to the first fruits principle without exception, the discipline reorganized everything downstream. Not magically, practically. The posture changed, the decisions changed, the outcomes followed. Give first, every time. That is habit 1. Habit 2. Speak about money the way Scripture speaks about it. This habit will sound simple. It is not. Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Words of scarcity, anxiety, and perpetual lack are not honest descriptions of reality. They are covenant misalignments. They rehearse a framework of shortage as though it is permanent when the text consistently frames provision as the default operating condition of a believer inside covenant. Of daily confession of stewardship identity. I am a manager of God's resources. I operate inside a covenant framework. My provision is already established, is not positive thinking. It is theological accuracy, and it reshapes financial decision making at the root. The person who says daily that they never have enough will make decisions that confirm that framework, not because of mystical law, because the belief shapes the behavior that produces the outcome. Habit 3, track every dollar as an act of worship. This is the one. This is what most tithe-paying, church-going, genuinely committed believers are skipping entirely, and it is costing them more than they understand. Giving 10% while the remaining 90% is managed with complete inattention is not biblical stewardship. It is selective obedience. God's system does not cover 1/10 of your financial life. It covers all of it. Luke 16:10 says this: Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Very little. The small transactions, the categories that bleed quietly, the subscriptions, the impulse decisions, the money that disappears between the 1st and the 15th without a destination. That is the test. Not the tithe. Any committed believer can organize the 10%. The test is the 90. Tracking every dollar is not a budgeting technique. It is a spiritual discipline. It is the daily act of acknowledging that every dollar in your possession is a resource under divine audit, and you are the manager responsible for the report. When you begin to track with that posture, two things happen. Waste becomes visible, and waste, when made visible, cannot be sustained by a serious believer. This habit alone, applied consistently for 90 days, reorganizes more financial behavior than most financial programs accomplish in a year. Right now, before we go further, type in the comments one word describing how you currently manage the 90% of your income that is not the tithe. Just one word. Your answer tells you exactly where to start. Habit 4. Rest from financial anxiety once a week. Exodus 20:8 through 11 is the Sabbath command. Most believers receive it as a spiritual instruction about worship and physical rest. It is that. But in the covenant framework of ancient Israel, the Sabbath had a specific economic implication that is almost entirely absent from modern teaching. The Sabbath year required that the land itself stop producing for commercial harvest every seventh year, not as a sacrifice, as a yield strategy. Land that rested produced more in the subsequent years than land worked without pause. God built margin into creation before he built anything else. Day 7 was rest before day 8 was productivity. Applied to your financial life, this means one designated day per week when you stop monitoring balances, stop calculating scenarios, stop processing financial anxiety. Not because the numbers are not real, because trust is a practice, not a feeling. And the person who cannot rest from financial worry for one day per week is operating on a foundation of self-reliance rather than covenant trust. That posture will sabotage multiplication at the exact moment accumulation begins. Margin is not a reward for success. Margin is a prerequisite for it. Habit 5. Seek counsel before every major financial decision. Proverbs 15:22 says this: plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Not occasionally, not in crisis. Before every major decision, Scripture explicitly and repeatedly links financial destruction to isolated decision making. The daily habit here is not a single accountability call in a moment of pressure. It is building a rhythm of consultation as the default posture before significant financial moves. Not because you lack intelligence, because the text says plans succeed with counsel and fail without it. That is a structural rule, not a conditional suggestion. Most significant financial mistakes share one common feature. The decision was made alone, quickly, under emotional pressure, without an external voice in the room. Counsel is not optional. The text does not treat it as optional. And the habit is daily in this sense: daily availability to receive input, daily willingness to slow a decision long enough to consult, daily practice of not trusting your own analysis exclusively. Now we reach the habit that determines whether the other 5 work at all. Habit 6. Practice contentment as a daily covenant posture. Philippians 4:11 through 12 says this: I have learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Notice the verb, learned. This is not a personality trait, it is an acquired discipline. Paul did not say he was naturally content. He said he learned it. That means contentment is a daily practice, not a spiritual gift distributed to certain temperaments. And here is the weight that most financial teaching never reaches. Discontentment is not just an emotional problem. It is a functional disqualification from the blessing cycle, because money is a tool. And the test is always the same question: can you be trusted with this level before he releases the next? A believer who cannot steward contentment at their current level is signaling, behaviorally, not spiritually, that additional resources would not be managed with any greater faithfulness. The test is always the present level, not the next one. God does not release the next assignment to the person who has not completed the current one. Most believers are praying to skip the test. The text does not offer that option. It offers the qualification framework. Demonstrate faithfulness at this level. Cultivate contentment as a daily practice, not passive resignation, active trust. And the promotion follows. This is the answer to the question from the beginning. The blessing is delayed not because God is withholding. It is delayed because the qualifying posture has not been established yet. Contentment is not the consolation prize for people who did not get the blessing. It is the prerequisite posture that positions you to receive and sustain it. Now hear the sequence entire. God blesses the person who gives first, because the first move declares the authority. God blesses the person who speaks covenant language, because the words rebuild the framework from the inside. God blesses the person who tracks the 90, because faithfulness with the small is the qualification for the large. God blesses the person who rests from anxiety, because trust is not claimed in statements, it is demonstrated in posture. God blesses the person who seeks counsel, because plans succeed with many advisors and fail without them. And God blesses the person who practices contentment because the test is always the present level and you cannot receive the next assignment. Until you have completed this one, this is not a list. It is a system. Remove one component and the chain breaks, which is exactly why the person who only tithes stays financially stagnant. They are operating one step of a six-habit system. The covenant is intact, the framework is not. The text has been there the entire time, not hidden, preserved, waiting for a reader willing to stop reading past it and actually follow the sequence. The next teaching examines habit 1 and habit 6 in depth, specifically the connection between the first fruits principle and contentment as a covenant unit. They do not operate independently. That connection changes the entire picture. That teaching is coming. If someone in your life is applying one of these habits in isolation and wondering why it is not working, share this with them today. That may be the word they have been waiting to hear. Walk wisely,